All right. Module 2. I would love for you to take a minute and go post in the Facebook group and talk about how Module 1 went for you. How did it go working on your interoceptive awareness? What did you notice about yourself? What kind of trends did you find? And was it hard to assess how your body was feeling? Share that with the group. Let us in on how you're doing. And then let's dig into module 2. So, module 2 is we're really going to hit hard on the topic of hunger. So, hunger is something that a lot of times we're like, am I really hungry right now? Is this real? Or is my body just trying to like sabotage me? Or if I'm hungry, am I supposed to eat? Like, do I know that this is true hunger? And then it really is time. Or what if I'm not hungry? Like, we have a lot of questions that can come up about this topic. And so, something that I hear a lot is that people feel like they have a willpower issue if they snack a lot or they binge eat or just generally overeat. They think it's a willpower issue. But most of the time, it's actually just biology doing its job. Because for us, living in diet culture and coming from, especially if we have a history of dieting, we're so used to restriction and we're so used to deprivation that it doesn't take very much for us to think that we're overeating. And the truth is that when we're driven towards food, that's our biology saying, hey, I need you to go get me some food because I'm hungry. You have not given me enough. The celery 4 hours ago did not fill me up, so I'm going to need some more food, right? So it's really interesting actually when we are deprived of food and we don't have enough and we need more of it. Remember, food is energy at its most basic form. It's energy for our bodies. Like, it's a basic survival mechanism. I think we forget that sometimes when we've been dieting for so long. It is literally essential to survival. And so when we've been deprived of it, you better believe that there are some survival mechanisms that come into play that drive you towards food. Our body has a series of biological mechanisms that get set in motion like a row of dominoes. And a lot of that actually connects to our brain as well. There's like this brain body connection. And so you might notice that you have like increased thoughts of food and stuff like that. And that's because there is this brain body connection when it comes to us being deprived and your body trying to drive you towards eating more food. So, we're going to talk more about those mechanisms in this module as well as when we need to honor our hunger. So, what is hunger for? Right? I think it's this is such a basic question, but I feel like I need to ask it because we forget. We forget what hunger is for. We get told that hunger is something we should ignore. It's trying to ruin our weight loss goals. It's trying to sabotage us. It's a vice that, is just attached to some sort of food addiction that you have, or it's an inconvenience when you're trying to be healthy or whatever, right? But let's scale it back here. Let's remember what hunger really is. It's a signal, and it's saying, I need something, aka I need food. Hunger equals time to eat. It's so simple. And for your body, it's like, hey, I'm expressing this need because I need it in order to go on. So please don't ignore it. And yeah, we get stuck in our heads about like, oh, this is inconvenient. This is going to get in the way of my weight loss goals. It's a vice. But the truth is, it's a gift. And that's a really important shift for you to make in your mind, is that hunger is not out to get you. It's a gift, because if we didn't have it, we wouldn't know when to eat and we would starve to death and we'd die. Right? If it's a basic survival need, then we have to actually fulfill that need. And so hunger is a way of reminding us, hey, it's time you fulfill that need. And so not only at the core, in the most core way, is it for your survival, it's also to help you thrive. Because if we are really in tune with our signals, not only will we be eating in a way that just helps us survive, but we'll also feel good as well. We'll feel really good. And so it's important that you learn to be, we talked about this in the last module, but it's important that you get really, really familiar with what your body is saying to you so that you can respond in ways that facilitate you being well nourished, not just nourished, but well nourished. We'll talk more about that. So a lot of times, I know I used to think this way. I don't know about you, but I used to be like comforted by being hungry because it made me, in my mind, I was like, okay, I can just picture all the fat melting off my body right now because I'm hungry. And so we think that hunger is a sign of fat being burned. But this isn't scientifically accurate. Only a small component, it's estimated like 5% of your stored fat is converted to a fuel source when you're in like a state of deprivation or semi-starvation or starvation. What the body will do instead of burning all your fat off is it actually turns into some different creative mechanisms for creating fuel. This process is called gluconeogenesis, which just means, if you break it down, it means new creation of glucose. Glucose is the body's main source of fuel. So your body will use that process of gluconeogenesis and turn protein into glucose. That way you get that energy that you are currently starving the body from. And so where does it get protein? Mainly from the muscle. So we're actually breaking down lean mass from our organ tissue and from like our main muscles that we see and that we want them to be big and like noticeable or whatever. We're actually breaking that down in order to have fuel and survive. This is like taking, if you were to have like a hearth with a fireplace in it, this is like having a wood burning fireplace, and then you run out of wood, and so you start to take wood from like the hearth itself, and then you throw it onto the fire. That doesn't make sense. We need to go get wood from somewhere else. And so I want you to think about that when we're like dieting or just in a state of starvation. It's not like all this fat is burning off of our body, melting off of our body. We're taking from our like muscle stores and our organ, like we're literally breaking down our own body to survive. So when we have extreme or prolonged hunger, such as when we're dieting, that's a sign of lean mass being lost. You can expect that your muscle mass is going down, which is undesirable and potentially dangerous. Right? If we're tearing down the heart muscle in order to make up for the fact that we're on a low carb diet, that's dangerous. So to talk a little bit more about how undereating can have these harmful consequences, there's this really ground shaking study that was done in the World War II times. So during this era, there was a study on 32 healthy men. And so they wanted to look at what happens when they're like starved or semi-starved. Not starved like no food, but semi-starved. They have some food, but not a lot. Not enough to really satisfy. And the study has really shaped nutrition literature as we know it. So 32 men with superior mental and physical health. They were like dimes, right? Or gems. They were told to eat as they please and with their typical quantity for 3 months. 3 months, no changes, do whatever you want. And then the following 6 months, they cut their calories almost in half. And so they wanted to see, again, let's not completely take away food because that's going to kill them, but let's just take away like half of what they're used to eating and see what happens. And what they found was really startling, and it mirrors what we see in dieters. Because a lot of times if we're on a diet, we're eating about half of what we normally do. And so what they found was their metabolic rate decreased by about 40%, meaning their metabolism, they were burning about 40% less calories than normal. They had an obsession with food. They were collecting recipes. They were talking about food. They had heightened cravings. If they had done that study in modern day, what they would have found was that they were scrolling through TikTok to look through food videos. Like, the obsession was real. It was psychologically taking over their mind. And then their eating style had changed. They were vacillating from being like ravenous and gulping down food like an animal, and then stalling the eating experience and playing with the food, dawdling over the food for hours. So there would be some times where they were like really trying to make it last as long as possible, and then other times where they were just like, I gotta get this in. Several men failed to adhere to the diet, no surprise there. And some even reported episodes of bulimia. And some men were deliberately exercising so that they could increase their food ration. Doesn't that sound like when we're dieting? A lot of their moods changed to being moody and apathetic and irritable and depressed. Is that not how you have felt when you've dieted in the past? Trying to lose weight. This is why I don't ever recommend we go on a diet. So I want to talk about carbohydrates. Obviously, these men were starved of carbohydrates, and we are when we go on diets. That's like the thing, is do low carb, and then all of your weight goals will come true, right? All your dreams will come true. You'll have the dream body that you've always wanted. But that doesn't really make sense, because carbohydrates are the main and preferred source of fuel in the body. I talked about gluconeogenesis, how we can turn protein into glucose. We only do that as a backup mechanism. The main way we get glucose is through carbs. Any source of carbohydrates gets converted to glucose in the body, and that is our wood to the fire. That is like our, not the hearth, that is our pile of wood off to the side, ready to go to make the fire grow stronger. Without it, we turn to muscle and organ tissue, maybe a little bit of fat for fuel at some point, right? But not nearly as quickly as we usually think, right? We usually go to protein and muscle sources first. Without carbs, we enter into that state of starvation where the body is using protein as a source of fuel, and then you're also starting to see those symptoms like the men in that experiment. So another really interesting study and ways that we've examined semi-starvation is researchers looked at the Biggest Loser contestants, and they wanted to kind of see, like, how are they doing after the fact. So they actually looked at them 6 years later from when they did the show. And if you don't know what The Biggest Loser is, it's, I don't know that they still do it, but it used to be on TV. It was a reality show. It was just a weight loss competition. And you won a bunch of money if you lost the most weight. And super, super toxic to grow up watching that, honestly, looking back. And anyway, so these researchers, they followed them for 6 years, and what they found was that their lean mass from when they left the show and finished the show was still down by over 10 pounds. Now remember, I'm not talking about 10 pounds of fat, I'm talking about 10 pounds of muscle and organ tissue. That was still down by over 10 pounds. And what they also found was that for each pound of body protein that was lost, 3 or 4 pounds of associated water was lost. So if we take the Biggest Losers lean muscle mass, right? If they lost 24 pounds of lean mass, which they did when they first finished the show. Then we multiply that by 3 to 4 pounds of water per pound of lean mass lost. We've got 72 to 96 pounds of weight loss was entirely water and lean mass. So these people who are boasting of how they lost 70 pounds, it's like, okay, you lost 70 pounds of protein, tissue, like, lean tissue and muscle and water. But we think that it's like, they lost 70 pounds of fat, right? So anyway, that's just kind of another visual for you. And so something that we are very used to hearing about is keto. What about keto? That's apparently super scientific and the next best thing. But what I want to the point I want to drive home with doing a ketogenic diet or being in ketosis is that, first of all, it's not sustainable. And second of all, it's a backup to the backup mechanism to give you energy. So without carbs, eventually, like, we might use protein first, but then eventually we end up converting stored fat to usable energy called ketones. Okay, so yes, at some point fat will be used for energy. But here's the problem. Doing this for long periods of time has been shown in some cases to increase risk of type 2 diabetes and increase insulin resistance. Side effects, and also decrease exercise performance because you don't have like energy from glucose, which you really need for exercise. And the side effects are, it can cause kidney stones, which if you talk to anybody who's had a kidney stone, that is one of the most painful things ever. Osteoporosis, hyperlipidemia, which just means like your cholesterol is high and all of that, which then of course increases your risk for heart disease, and impaired growth, like if we're talking about children. So is it really worth it to go through all of these hoops and get into ketosis if you're increasing your risk for all of these problems just to lose a few pounds? There are better ways. There are better ways. So we talked a little bit about in the beginning, like these mechanisms that communicate with the brain and the body about driving you towards food. So I want to talk more about that. Our bodies are biologically primed to eat when we're deprived of food. Kind of like, I want you to picture like a sprinter that's crouched at the like takeoff line, and the gun goes and they start running, right? And the pistol's triggered. That's like how we are. We're primed to be driven towards food when we're deprived of it. So here's a few ways that the body does prime us to eat. Number one is salivation. Have you ever been hungry and you like notice, I mean, even just talking about food, I'm like noticing that I have more salivation going on, more saliva in my mouth. Even when it's not around me, I don't have any food around me right now. And just thinking about it makes me salivate. The other thing is we can have increased digestive hormones. So digestive hormones have been found to be higher in dieters both before and after eating. So that just means that like these hormones that are focused on digestion is higher in a dieter. So that means it's abnormal, right? These things that we should not have in high quantities are there when we're semi-starved. So carbohydrate cravings can also increase. I'm sure you've noticed this when you go on a diet, you start craving bread all the time and whatever. We want all the carbs. And it's because of neuropeptide Y. There's a reason for this. You're not crazy. There's a scientific reason for this. Neuropeptide Y is a chemical that's actually produced in the brain, and it triggers our drive to eat carbohydrates. It is specific to carbohydrates because remember, that's our main fuel source. And so if we are low on them, we're going to have this mechanism shoot off in the body that drives us towards them. And so under eating does drive that specific chemical into action, causing the body to seek more carbs. So this means that we are way more easily driven into a binge. That's not a lack of self-control. It's literally just your biology working. It's your biology saying, I need more food. Go get me more food. And now you're binge eating. It's not a lack of willpower. It's not a lack of discipline. It's literally just hunger. And if we had just fed the body in the early stages of hunger and not starved it through a diet or through fasting or whatever it is, we would have never binge ate in the first place, because you wouldn't have had all these mechanisms working against you. The liver's storage of carbs only lasts about 3 to 6 hours. So if you're not already eating every 3 to 6 hours, I usually recommend every 2 to 4 even, 3 on average, then be sure you're doing that. Because the brain, the nervous system, and red blood cells, they all rely exclusively on glucose, aka carbs, for fuel. So even small decreases can cause problems at the cellular level. We also need protein, we also need fat, both of these for energy and other functions. It's not just for carbohydrates. So keep in mind that like food is energy. Not just carbohydrates. All food is energy, right? But our carbohydrate intake is important. That's why if we're looking at a macronutrient distribution range, usually it's like 45 to 65% of our calories should be coming from carbs. So that leaves 35%. If you are doing the 65, that leaves 35% left from between fat and protein, because they're not as necessary in terms of energy. So that's the point I'm trying to make. So it's really crazy when we do these low carb diets to completely rob ourselves of something that is so incredibly vital in our everyday dietary intake. We need them. So if you're not already eating every 2 to 4 hours, at the most, don't go longer than 6. Be sure that you are getting something to eat with some carbohydrates. For sure by 6 hours, but I do recommend every 2 to 4 hours. When we are consistently denying our hunger, we're freaking our body out. It's losing our mind. This is how I like to explain it. If you've ever been in a relationship where you have, or even, it doesn't even need to be a romantic one, just a relationship with a human. It could be friendship or family, and they consistently shut you down when you express your feelings. Over time, you learn not to express your feelings to that person. Why would you? It's never gone well for you. So you lose trust in that person responding to your feelings appropriately and meeting your needs. Our body does the same thing. When we consistently deny it of food, when it's expressed hunger, right? When we consistently deny it of a need, when it's expressed the feeling, it stops expressing it. So we have silenced signals. So if you've ever felt like, I don't really get hungry, it's probably because your body doesn't trust you at this point. And it doesn't express hunger, right? Why would it? Because it's used to you not fulfilling that need. And then denying your hunger can also make us overeat, because we're making up for what we lost in the past, right? Well, you didn't feed me lunch, so I guess I'm going to have like a huge dinner now. And then we're like, oh my gosh, I just binged. Like, why did I overeat? I had so much to eat. But really, if you look at the grand scheme of the whole day, you should have just had lunch. Then you wouldn't have had such a huge dinner, and now you feel sick, right? And then something I do want to say as well, if you do have silenced hunger signals, is that you might not feel hunger until it's like totally and completely ravenous. It will still like at some point express that signal when it's desperate enough, but it has stopped giving you like the early signs of hunger, the gentle hunger that helps prevent you from being too far down the hole. We need our bodies to consistently know, or we need our bodies to know that we consistently have access to food. To get a hold on binge eating and overeating and the biological consequences like a slowed metabolism, we need our body to know that we have access to food consistently. Dieting and deprivation need to stop once and for all. If we're doing that, we are never going to get a hold on the binging and the overeating and the slowed metabolism. As long as we're in deprivation mode, none of that can come. We can't get freedom from the rest of that. So we can, luckily, recondition our biology to move forward rather than stay in that state of like starvation. And the reality is your body doesn't know the difference between being on a diet and being starving in the middle of the Sahara Desert for 3 weeks. It doesn't. It doesn't know that you're just trying to lose 10 pounds for a wedding that you've got next month. It just thinks you don't, it just knows you don't have access to food, and it doesn't know what to do with that information besides drive you towards more food and then slow your metabolism down so that you're not burning too much energy since it doesn't have access to energy anymore. So we're literally shooting ourselves in the foot when we go on these diets or we cut carbs or we try to eat less. There are other ways to take care of your health, and that's what you're learning in this course. So don't worry, you're in the right place. I also want you to think of it this way. When you tell a child that they can't have a cookie, what happens when we leave them alone with the cookies? They probably eat the whole jar or plate or box of cookies. Why? It's because you told them they can't have them. We are the same way. We don't grow out of that. We don't grow out of wanting what we can't have. We're human. That's just like a part of who we are, is we want what we can't have. When I was in high school, you better believe I wanted to date the boys that my parents didn't like. Or that I just wanted to date, period, when I wasn't allowed to. And then as soon as I was allowed to, I was like, I'm not that interested. We want what we can't have. We want the job that we can't seem to get. We want more money. We want things that we don't have. The grass is always greener. It's the same thing with food. If we deprive ourselves, we will end up overeating because we just want it more. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of really figuring out when is the right time to eat so that I'm preventing binge eating and overeating and slowed metabolism. If you're looking at your hunger scale from your workbook, I always recommend to try and eat when you're at a 3. It's like a gentle, polite hunger. So these are, if you're looking at that hunger and fullness chart, gentle is 3. This is 2, 1, and 0, right? 0 is like, it is so painful how hungry you are. It's intense. It's primal. You have no control over it. It's so urgent. Right before that, you're probably just like ravenous. You're really irritable and anxious. And you like can't stop thinking about food. And then before we get to that point, you're just like, so this is like if we're at a 2 on the hunger scale, it's like I'm very hungry. I'm looking forward to a good meal, but I'm not like pissed at the world yet. So we want to try and eat when we're at a 3. We're not very hungry. We're not irritable. We're also not like intensely urgent about getting food. It's just polite. It's like, yeah, I could eat right now. This sounds good. But you're not stressed about it. So if you're feeling that you're at a 3 on the hunger scale, I recommend eating within 30 minutes to an hour. That way we avoid getting too hungry to the point of like binging. And if we do that consistently over time, that's when our metabolism slows down and all of that. So start training yourself to listen to that gentle hunger. Don't wait until it's ravenous, in your face hunger. I think my cat is playing with the ping pong table, if you can hear the ping pong balls. But yeah, honor the hunger by listening for it. You can't just like honor your hunger by eating randomly. You have to eat at the right time. So listen to the body. Remember, we've been working on that in the last module, just being aware of how we feel. So look for that gentle, polite hunger. Have you ever, I'm curious, have you ever gone to a grocery store when you were ravenously hungry? How did that go for you? How much more money did you end up spending on food than you actually needed to buy that day? I've gone to the grocery store when I'm hungry plenty of times, like ravenously hungry, and like everything looked good. So I ended up buying things that I never really ate because once I actually had a meal, I was like, I'm not interested in that thing anymore because I'm not ravenous. Right? So, first step to honoring your hunger, listen for it, look for the gentle feeling, the polite feeling of hunger, and then try to eat within 30 to 60 minutes of that. Now, you're not always going to feel this in your stomach. That's kind of like the most classic place that we feel hunger. There are some other symptoms of hunger that you can have. So like mild gurgling and gnawing, like that's totally normal to just feel that like emptiness, like there's lack of volume in your stomach. That's for sure, like, yes, a sign of hunger. But also just like hearing some growling noises, or if you have aching in the chest, that's kind of an odd one that people don't realize is a sign of hunger. For me, that's like a late stage of hunger. When I start to feel like my esophagus and my chest is achy, I'm like, oh, I need some food. You can also get lightheaded. You can have difficulty concentrating. You can get this uncomfortable stomach pain, which then it makes it really awkward to eat if you're at the point of you're so hungry that it's painful in your stomach. You probably don't want to eat. So that's kind of like, try to prevent it ever getting there. You can get irritable, of course. You can feel faint, have a headache, and thoughts of food. So all of these sensations of hunger, they, I would say, are more on the late stage of hunger side of things. But for you personally, I want you to be aware of what your signs of hunger are. What do you feel like when you're at that 3? When you're at that gentle, polite hunger? Do you have just like some thoughts of food? Are you feeling like a little bit of a headache or just difficulty concentrating? Is that an early sign for you, or is that a late sign? So figure out for you what that 3 feels like. Again, I can't tell you what it feels like because I don't know what your body likes to do. So that's up to your body. And then, oh yeah, that's just the same thing that I was saying. Check in with yourself regularly. Verge on the edge of like being hyper aware, being hyper vigilant about what you're feeling. We need to reconnect to our body. And if you've been dieting or you've been restricting or just not used to this process, then right now you're not connecting to your body. So it takes some training. And so being hyper aware, really allowing yourself to stop, listen, don't be distracted constantly by everyday life. Give yourself time to really check in with yourself and see how you're feeling. Because yeah, eventually it's going to become so natural that you really don't have to think about it. But right now, again, this is a muscle that we're training, and so it takes that hyper awareness. Rule of thumb, don't let more than 5 waking hours pass without eating. I'm not talking about when you're asleep. I'm talking about after you've gotten up and before you go to sleep. Don't let more than 5 hours go, even if you don't think you're hungry. Because if you're not feeling hunger by 5 hours going by, that's probably because your hunger signals aren't, they don't trust you right now, and so they're not expressing themselves. But they will if you start to consistently feed yourself again, and then you don't have to rely on the clock. We want to avoid that, actually. So some other voices of hunger. You don't need to feel like eating only when hungry is a new rule. I don't want this to turn into the hunger and fullness diet for you. This is my cat, Garbage. Say hi. I don't want this to turn into a hunger and fullness diet, right? It's okay if you eat outside of being at that perfect, shiny little 3 on the hunger scale. It's okay. You're not always going to. Again, this is not a process that you're going to be perfect at. So there's a few other reasons why the intuitive eater may elect to go ahead and eat, even if they are not biologically hungry. So the first one is just some taste hunger, right? Something just looks, okay, can you? Something just looks good, right? Maybe grandma made lemon box cake or something like that. He is like, or maybe you are on a date and they brought over like a free dessert at your table because your waiter was terrible or something. Like, it's okay if you eat something just because it sounds good or because the occasion calls for it. Yes, you're going to have wedding cake on your wedding day, even if you're not like perfectly hungry for it. It's okay. The occasion calls for that. Give into it. Don't suppress that, because when we deny our taste hunger, that's not giving us unconditional permission to eat when we want to. And so the result of that is that we actually set ourselves up for binge eating. If we suppress our taste hunger, we don't allow ourselves to have the food and have the taste, then we're setting ourselves up for binging. And then another thing is just practicality. If you know that you're not going to have access to food for 4 more hours, then you better go ahead and eat, even if you're not hungry, because you know that in 4 hours you're going to be ravenous. So it's good to go ahead and just honor the body by giving it some food ahead of time to kind of help you last. So be practical. And then the last thing is just emotional hunger. Sometimes we want to eat to deal with some feelings that we're having. It's not inherently bad to emotionally eat. It's okay from time to time. It's a problem if we do it all the time and every day, but occasionally you just can't really, nothing sounds good except for having something to help you feel better. Having a food that's comforting for you or whatever. That's okay. It's okay. The second that you say it's not okay, you're going to want to do it even more, and then you'll binge. So just go ahead and make peace with the idea of emotionally eating from time to time. You'll be okay. So I'm really excited to hear from you guys in the Facebook group on what your thoughts are about this module as you're going through it. Hunger is... once you get the hang of it, you're going to feel so much freedom from the pressure of like, I'm not supposed to eat yet, it's not the right time, or I've already gone over my calories or whatever. It's not about the time on the clock. It's not about the amount of calories you had. It's just about listening to your body. Okay, so as a reminder, any tech or billing questions that you have can go to support@yatesnutrition.com. Use your Facebook group. And if you want another next level of support, pop over to yatesnutrition.com/application and apply for Nourished and Free. I would probably finish this course first just to see how you're doing. But if you do want that coach on your team and more, if you just love this so much and you want more, then that's what I would recommend.